I moved your inheritance into my name. Starting fresh with someone younger who actually appreciates me. Greg's voice crackled through the phone from whatever beachside paradise he was calling from, followed by that smug, guttural laugh I'd grown to despise over the last few years. It was a laugh that oozed self-satisfaction, a sound that always meant he thought he'd outsmarted someone. This time, that someone was me. You really should have paid more attention to your accounts, sweetheart. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water, a shock so profound it should have sent me reeling. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I sat quietly in my kitchen in Portland, Oregon, watching the relentless gray rain streak down the windowpane. It was a typical Oregon afternoon, dreary and damp, a perfect mirror for the moment my 22-year marriage crumbled in real time. Far in the background of the call, I could hear the faint, tinny sound of female laughter and the gentle rhythm of waves crashing on a shore, a sound so alien to my rainy Portland reality it felt like a broadcast from another planet. Some golf trip. You're right, I whispered into the phone, my voice as steady and cold as the stone countertops under my hands. You deserve it. Then I hung up. My name is Danielle Foster, and I'm 45 years old. For most of my adult life, I have been the epitome of responsible. I work as a senior accountant for Hollowgate Systems, a mid-size logistics company. My life is a ledger of balanced columns and meticulous planning. I'm the person who reconciles the accounts down to the last cent, the one who budgets for Christmas in July, the woman who has a diversified, if modest, retirement portfolio. I've always been careful, methodical, and, as I was now painfully aware, perhaps far too trusting. But not today. Today, as the rain drummed its somber beat on the roof, I felt something shift inside me. It was a cool, precise click, like tumblers falling into place in a well-oiled lock. The lock on a vault that had been sealed for a very long time. Greg thought he was clever. He thought that after 2 decades of marriage, of me patiently managing our household finances while he chased one get-rich-quick scheme after another, he could simply waltz away with the inheritance I'd received from my beloved Uncle Theodore just 18 months ago. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend in his haze of arrogance and cheap cologne, was that I'd learned to be very, very careful with money, especially after watching him blow through his own savings on his pathetic midlife crisis toys. The cherry-red motorcycle that sat gathering dust in the garage, the ludicrously expensive golf clubs he used maybe twice a year, the designer clothes he claimed were networking investments. Each purchase was a small betrayal, a chip against the foundation of our shared future. And more importantly, he didn't know about Uncle Theodore. My uncle wasn't just my mother's brother, he was the closest thing I'd ever had to a father. A self-made man who had built his first fortune in his 30s, only to lose it all to a scheming business partner. That betrayal had forged him in fire, making him not just wealthy again, but paranoid. He saw predators and opportunists around every corner, and he had spent years teaching me his hard-won lessons. When he passed away, he left me more than just a substantial inheritance of $600,000 and the family cabin in the mountains. He left me a roadmap. Detailed, handwritten instructions on protecting inherited wealth from the exact kind of person my husband had just revealed himself to be. I had followed those instructions to the letter. I poured myself a glass of Pinot Noir, the deep red a stark contrast to the gray outside. I sat back down at my kitchen table, where my laptop was still open to the banking portal I'd been checking when he called. The inheritance, my security blanket, my escape plan that I'd hoped I'd never need to use, was safe. Greg's timing was spectacularly poor. He was a fool playing chess with a grandmaster, and he'd just walked his king directly into checkmate. He just didn't know it yet. The phone rang again, his name flashing on the screen. I glanced at the caller ID and let it go to voicemail. Let him stew. Let him wonder why I'd been so calm, so unnervingly accepting of his betrayal. He was about to learn that sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the world clean. I allowed myself a small, sharp smile. Greg had just made the biggest mistake of his life, and he didn't even know it yet. Growing up, I'd always been the responsible one. While my friends were out partying and experimenting, I was studying accounting, planning for a stable future. I met Greg during my senior year of college. He was magnetic, a whirlwind of charm and ambition who talked about building an empire together. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the only person in the world, his dreams wrapping around you until they felt like your own. Back then, I believed him. I believed in the future he painted, a vibrant masterpiece of success and shared joy. For 22 years, I'd been the bedrock of that dream. I managed our household finances with the precision of a surgeon, stretching every dollar, investing wisely, building a comfortable life. I did this while Greg chased his own tail, lurching from one half-baked venture to another. There was the construction company that folded after 6 months, leaving a trail of debt and angry suppliers. Then came the restaurant investment, a trendy farm-to-table concept that turned into a tax nightmare when his partner skimmed the profits. Most recently, it was the cryptocurrency venture, a convoluted scheme that cost us our entire vacation fund. Each time, I'd quietly cleaned up the mess. I'd negotiated with creditors, rebuilt our savings, and never once said a word about his failures. I shielded him from the consequences, believing I was supporting his entrepreneurial spirit. I see now that he saw my silence not as loyalty, but as weakness. He saw my trust as stupidity. I was the reliable, boring wife who would always be there to fix things, the financial safety net he could bounce on without fear of it breaking. When Uncle Theodore passed away last year, I'd grieved deeply. Not just for the loss of the only family member who truly understood me, but for the end of our long Sunday afternoon conversations about money, legacy, and the importance of protecting what you've earned. Theodore had built his wealth twice. He'd learned from his painful past that trust is a commodity more valuable than gold, and far more easily squandered. Danielle, he'd told me during one of our last visits, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, trust is earned daily but lost in an instant. Protect yourself, even from the people you love most. At the time, I'd nodded politely, thinking he was being overly cautious, his past trauma casting too long a shadow. Now, I understood he'd been giving me a roadmap. A survival guide. After receiving the inheritance, the first thing I did was schedule a meeting with his longtime financial advisor, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Patricia Wells. Following Theodore's explicit, handwritten instructions, we spent weeks structuring everything. The bulk of the money and the deed to the mountain cabin were placed into an irrevocable protective trust. My name was the sole trustee. To access anything significant, a series of complex security protocols had to be followed. It was ironclad. Patricia had looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "Your uncle was a very wise man," she'd said. "This structure is designed to be impenetrable to, let's call them opportunistic spouses." Together, we'd also worked with a private banking firm, Gravora Group, a firm that catered to clients who valued discretion and security above all else. The accounts weren't just protected by passwords, they were wrapped in layers of sophisticated fraud detection, legal safeguards, and authorization protocols that required multiple forms of biometric and verbal verification for any significant transactions. Greg's name appeared nowhere on any of the documents. In fact, the only way he could have accessed anything was if I'd voluntarily added him as a beneficiary and provided him with the specific, multi-stage authorization codes. Which, of course, I hadn't. His plan, I realized, was laughably amateur. He had probably tried to access our joint checking account, where I'd deposited a small portion of the inheritance for household expenses, and assumed the rest was just as vulnerable. But the bulk of Uncle Theodore's gift remained safely locked away, earning interest and waiting for the day I might actually need it. That day, apparently, had arrived sooner than I'd expected. I had suspected Greg was planning something for months. The signs were all there, small but significant changes in his behavior. The late-night phone calls he claimed were work-related, whispering in the other room. The sudden, intense interest in our financial accounts, asking questions he'd never bothered with before. "Just want to get a better handle on things, Danny," he'd say with a dismissive wave of his hand. And the way he'd started asking seemingly innocent questions about Uncle Theodore's inheritance, about the bank it was in, and where exactly the money was being held. That's when I decided to set my own traps. 3 weeks ago, I'd accidentally left a fake bank statement on my desk, one showing a much smaller inheritance balance in a completely different, more accessible-looking account. I knew he'd see it. I watched him through the reflection in my computer monitor, his fingers flying as he surreptitiously photographed the document when he thought I wasn't looking. His attempted theft yesterday had been his move against the wrong account entirely. A ghost he'd been chasing while the real prize was leagues beyond his reach. I opened my laptop and began making a list of everything I needed to do. Greg had just handed me the perfect reason to finally, completely, and irrevocably take control of my life. The call I'd been expecting came at 7:15 the next morning. I was already dressed and having coffee, having slept better than I had in months. The rain had cleared, and a pale, watery sun was trying to break through the clouds. "Danielle. What the hell is going on?" Greg's voice was tight with confusion and a barely contained panic that was music to my ears. "I tried to transfer the money yesterday, and now the bank is saying there's some kind of investigation. They froze everything." "Good morning to you too, Greg," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "How's your golf trip going?" "Cut the crap." "What did you do?" he screeched. I took another deliberate sip, savoring both the rich Colombian blend and the sound of fear creeping into my husband's voice. "I didn't do anything, sweetheart. But apparently, you tried to commit bank fraud. That tends to trigger automatic security protocols." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Greg spoke again, his voice strained. "What are you talking about? I'm your husband. I have rights to that money." "Actually, you don't." I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the morning drizzle. Uncle Theodore's inheritance was placed in a protected trust, specifically designed to prevent unauthorized access. When you tried to move funds without proper authorization, you triggered fraud prevention measures. "You're lying. Married couples share assets automatically. Not inherited assets placed in protective trusts, Greg. Especially not when the beneficiary has been advised to protect those assets from potential threats." I paused, letting that sink in. "The bank considers your attempted transfer to be identity theft and attempted grand larceny." I could hear him breathing hard through the phone. In the background, I caught the sound of that same female laughter from yesterday, though it sounded more nervous now. My replacement was apparently still enjoying her vacation, blissfully unaware that her sugar daddy had just become a major liability. "Danielle, you need to fix this. Call the bank and tell them you authorized the transfer." "Why would I do that? Because we're married? Because you love me? Because," I finished quietly, "you called me yesterday to announce you were leaving me for someone younger? Because you've been lying to me about this golf trip? Because you thought you could steal my inheritance and run off into the sunset?" Another long silence. When Greg spoke again, his voice had lost all its bluster. "I can explain everything." "I'm sure you can. But I'm not interested in hearing it." I set down my coffee cup and reached for the manila folder I'd prepared the night before. "I'm filing for divorce today, Greg. My lawyer will be in touch." "You can't do this. That money belongs to both of us." "No," I said calmly, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over me. "It really doesn't. And thanks to your little stunt yesterday, you've just made my divorce attorney's job incredibly easy." I hung up and turned off my phone. Today was going to be a very busy day, and I had a lot of people to call. But first, I was going to enjoy another cup of coffee and watch the rain. For the first time in years, the weather matched my mood perfectly, clear and refreshing. By 9 a.m., I was sitting in the sleek, modern offices of Patterson and Associates, the law firm I'd quietly consulted 3 months ago when Greg's behavior had started becoming increasingly erratic. My attorney, Jennifer Patterson, was a sharp, impeccably dressed woman in her 50s who specialized in complex divorce cases involving hidden assets and financial fraud. "Danielle, I have to say, this is one of the cleaner cases I've seen in years," Jennifer said, reviewing the documents I'd brought. "Your husband essentially gift-wrapped his infidelity and attempted theft for us." I'd come prepared with everything. Screenshots of Greg's suspicious credit card charges over the past 6 months, including hotels and restaurants in cities where he'd supposedly been on business trips. There were charges for expensive dinners for two and jewelry purchases from boutiques I'd never heard of, let alone received gifts from. I also had the banking records showing his attempted unauthorized access to my inheritance, complete with timestamps and fraud alerts. "What I don't understand," Jennifer continued, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on a printout, "is how he thought he could access a protected trust without your authorization codes." I pulled out my phone and showed her a series of text messages from 6 months ago. "He's been asking me about my banking passwords," I explained, claiming he wanted to help organize our finances. I always gave him vague answers, but I think he's been watching me enter information when I thought he wasn't paying attention. The truth was more calculated than that. I'd suspected Greg was planning something for months. The late-night phone calls he claimed were work-related, the sudden interest in our financial accounts, the way he'd started asking seemingly innocent questions about Uncle Theodore's inheritance and where exactly the money was being held. I'd started setting traps 3 weeks ago. The fake bank statement was just the beginning. "There's something else," I told Jennifer, pulling out another manila envelope. "Greg's been transferring money out of our joint accounts for months. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger automatic alerts, but it adds up to almost $15,000. Jennifer's eyebrows shot up as she reviewed the documentation. Where was the money going? An account I'd never seen before. I hired a private investigator last month to look into it. I slid another document across her desk. Turns out Greg opened a secret account 8 months ago. The money was being used to fund his affair. Hotel rooms, trips, gifts for his girlfriend. And you have proof of the affair? I nodded toward my phone. The investigator followed him to Phoenix last weekend. Photos, video, credit card receipts. His golf trip is actually a romantic getaway with a 28-year-old named Amber, who works at his favorite sports bar. Jennifer was taking notes quickly. This is excellent work, Danielle. With this level of documentation, we can file for divorce on grounds of adultery and financial malfeasance. Plus, his attempted theft yesterday gives us leverage for a very favorable settlement. There was a final, crucial detail. There's one more thing, I said quietly. When I set up the inheritance protection with my uncle's financial advisor, I included a clause. A specific stipulation that would automatically revoke any claim Greg might have to our shared marital assets if he ever attempted to access the inheritance fraudulently. Jennifer looked up from her notes, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across her face. You mean his attempt yesterday triggered an automatic forfeiture clause? I smiled back, feeling the last vestiges of my 22-year-old naivete evaporate. As of yesterday evening, Greg legally forfeited his claim to our house, our shared savings, and his portion of my retirement accounts. I smiled grimly. Uncle Theodore was very thorough in his advice about protecting family wealth from predators. Jennifer sat back in her chair, looking genuinely impressed. Your uncle sounds like he was a very wise man. He was. And he taught me that sometimes, the best defense is preparation. The call from Patricia Wells at Gravora Group Private Banking came at 11 a.m., just as I was leaving Jennifer's office. Patricia's voice was professionally calm, but I could hear a distinct note of satisfaction underneath. Mr. Foster has been calling our offices repeatedly since 8 this morning, she said. He seems to be under the impression that he can resolve this situation by speaking to a supervisor. And what have you told him? I asked, unlocking my car. That any investigation into attempted unauthorized access to protected accounts must be handled through proper legal channels. We've also informed him that his actions have triggered automatic security protocols that cannot be reversed without court intervention. She paused. I should mention that I'm filing for divorce. My attorney has documentation of financial irregularities in our joint accounts as well. The agents exchanged glances. Agent Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Foster, we need you to understand that what your husband attempted wasn't just a civil matter between spouses. Attempting to access federally protected inheritance trusts through fraudulent means is a serious crime. How serious? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Bank fraud charges could result in up to 20 years in federal prison and substantial fines, Agent Thompson said quietly. Especially when there's evidence of premeditation and ongoing deception. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Greg thought he was stealing my money and running off with his girlfriend. Instead, he'd potentially destroyed his entire future. What happens next? I asked. We'll need you to come in and give a formal statement. We'll also need access to any communications you have with your husband regarding the inheritance, and any documentation of suspicious financial activity. Agent Martinez handed me a business card. Your banking institution has been very cooperative in providing evidence of the attempted access. After the agents left, I sat alone in my office, staring out the window at the Portland skyline. Part of me felt guilty for not warning Greg about how thoroughly protected the inheritance was. But then I remembered his phone call yesterday, the smugness in his voice, the casual cruelty of announcing his betrayal, the laughter of another woman in the background. Greg had made his choice. He'd chosen to see my patience as weakness, my trust as stupidity, and my love as something he could exploit and discard. My phone rang. Greg's number again. This time, I answered. Danielle, please, you have to help me. There are federal agents asking questions. This has gone too far. Has it? I asked quietly. I made a mistake, okay? I got scared about our future, about money, and I panicked. But we can fix this, we can work it out. Greg, you didn't make a mistake, I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. You planned this for months. You opened secret accounts, you lied about business trips, you've been stealing from our joint savings to fund your affair, and you attempted to commit federal bank fraud. The only thing you didn't plan for was getting caught. What do you want from me? What will it take to make this go away? His voice was a desperate whine. Nothing, I said. There's nothing you can do to make this go away. You did this to yourself. Then I hung up and went to lunch. The news that Greg had been arrested came 3 days later, through a call from Agent Martinez. I was at home, preparing dinner for one, and actually enjoying the quiet when my phone rang. Mrs. Foster, I wanted to inform you that we've taken your husband into custody on charges of attempted bank fraud, identity theft, and violation of federal banking regulations. I set down my wooden spoon and leaned against the kitchen counter, closing my eyes for a moment. Where was he arrested? Phoenix. He was attempting to board a flight to Costa Rica with his companion when airport security detained him. Agent Martinez's voice carried a clear note of satisfaction. Apparently, fleeing the country while under federal investigation isn't advisable. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Jennifer Patterson with the update. She was delighted with the news, explaining that Greg's arrest would expedite our divorce proceedings significantly. A spouse in federal custody for financial crimes pretty much eliminates any claim he might have had to marital assets, she said. Plus, his attempted flight from the country suggests consciousness of guilt. That evening, I received a series of increasingly frantic voicemails from Amber, Greg's girlfriend. The first was angry, accusing me of destroying a good man out of spite. By the third message, her tone had shifted to pleading, asking if there was anything I could do to help Greg. I deleted them all without responding. The next morning, my doorbell rang. A courier delivered a thick envelope containing documents from Gravora Group Private Banking. Patricia Wells had included a handwritten note. All security protocols have been reset. Your inheritance remains fully protected and has continued earning interest throughout this ordeal. Your uncle would be proud. I smiled, thinking about Uncle Theodore's warnings about predators and opportunists. He'd been absolutely right, and his preparations had saved me from losing everything to a man who'd never deserved my trust in the first place. 6 weeks later, I stood in the courthouse as Judge Morrison finalized my divorce decree. Greg appeared via a video link from federal detention, looking haggard and defeated. His public defender had advised him to agree to all terms rather than fight a battle he couldn't win. The settlement was everything Jennifer had promised. I kept the house, my retirement accounts, the inheritance, and my car. Greg kept his legal troubles and a debt to the federal government that would follow him for decades. The defendant forfeited any claim to marital assets through his attempted fraudulent access to protected accounts, Judge Morrison stated for the record. This divorce is granted with prejudice, and all financial arrangements are final and non-negotiable. As I walked out of the courthouse, my phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Catherine. Saw the news about Greg's sentencing. 28 months in federal prison. Are you okay? I texted back, never been better. That afternoon, I met with Patricia Wells to discuss investment strategies for my newfound financial freedom. The inheritance, combined with my half of our previous shared assets, gave me enough security to consider early retirement, or perhaps starting my own accounting practice. Your uncle included a letter to be given to you after any legal proceedings involving the inheritance were resolved, Patricia said, handing me a sealed envelope. Inside, Uncle Theodore's familiar, strong handwriting offered his final advice. Danielle, if you're reading this, it means someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. I hope my preparation served you well. Remember that the greatest wealth is peace of mind, and you've earned yours. Build something beautiful with what remains. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. Uncle Theodore had given me more than money. He'd given me the tools to recognize my own worth, and the strength to protect it. The future stretched ahead, full of possibilities that were entirely mine to choose. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here, from a trusting wife to an empowered woman in just a few short months. Greg's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been liberating, forcing me to discover a strength I never knew I possessed. He had been planning his escape for months, thinking he was orchestrating the perfect betrayal. What he didn't realize was that he'd walked straight into a trap that Uncle Theodore had designed specifically for men exactly like him. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Amber. Greg told me what you did to him. You're a vindictive bitch who doesn't deserve a man like him. He's never been happier than he is with me. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, tell Greg that when he gets arrested for bank fraud, he'll have plenty of time to think about how happy you make him. The response came immediately, what arrest? I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the text to Jennifer with a note, evidence of ongoing affair and contact information for the other woman. Then I drove to my office at Hollowgate Systems. I had work to do, and maintaining my normal routine would be important in the days ahead. My colleagues didn't need to know that my personal life was imploding, at least not yet. But as I walked into the building, I felt lighter than I had in months.